Chapter 851. Nolan raised his hand and held her wrist, then fed her food, looking at her face. "Do you need something?" Maisie pouted. "Why do you think of me like that?" Even though she really did. Nolan scoffed. "Why are you being courteous with me?" Maisie leaned in. Her red lips inches away from his, her beautiful face looking innocent. "Dear, I want a couple to work together and be spokespeople for my jewelry. What do you think about that?" Nolan stared at her. "Why are you asking me?" She pressed her lips together and then put her arms around his neck. "I want to discuss this with you because I don't want you to be upset about it." Nolan pinched her chin, still keeping his eyes on her. "Why would I be upset?" She gave him puppy eyes. "Because the couple is two men." Nolan squinted and realized that something was off, but he didn't understand. Maisie turned around and sat on his lap, then pushed her long hair behind her. "Dear, you wouldn't want your dear wife's dream to shatter. Would you?" Nolan gulped and agreed with a grunt. "Since when did this elf become so seductive?" Maisie pressed her lips to his cheek and pressed her body to his. "Do you agree to this then?" Nolan was under her spell, but his logic was still intact. He chuckled and cupped her face, pushing some of her hair out of her face as though he had seen through her plan. "You're willing to push me into a trap?" Maisie choked and punched his chest. "I'm not doing that." He smiled. "If you want to pull two men together and are asking me about it, I must be involved in this." "No?" Maisie parted her lips. She was planning to trap him, but why was he so clever? "Let me guess." Nolan suddenly pulled her in and nibbled at her neck. "You want me and Helios to work together as your spokespeople?" Maisie was rendered speechless. He smiled. "Cheeky." Maisie hugged him, rubbing her head on his neck. "Could you help me just this once?" Nolan held her and said in a deep voice, "Stop that, or I'll..." "What are you going to do?" Maisie teased, but she tried to escape when she noticed the desire in his eyes. Nolan grabbed her and rained kisses on her. "You rascal. Are you trying to miss dinner?" Ouch. Maisie was defenseless, so she hugged him tightly. Neon lights brightened the dark night, mysterious and dreamy, making people lose themselves in the city that never slept. The lights and glitz were flashing, the songs loud. Barbara sat at the bar, drinking the cocktail the bartender had mixed. Although Ian and the manager had left, she still lingered around glitz out of habit. A man sat next to her and said to the bartender, "A bottle of whiskey." Barbara placed the glass to her lips and then squinted at the man next to her. "Hey, Mr. Boucher?" When Francisco turned and noticed the person sitting next to him was Barbara, he was surprised. "It's you. Here to get drunk?" Barbara smiled and took a sip. Francisco replied with annoyance, "So what if I am?" He was having a bad day and was irritated. He was going to explode. Barbara put her glass down. "I heard that Maisie is pregnant with your child." Francisco blew up. "Ms. Chase, be careful what you say." "What do you mean my child?" "That's not mine. I didn't sleep with her." Chapter 852. The bartender stared at him curiously but didn't dare speak. Barbara laughed. "I know. It's probably not great to suddenly become a father." The bartender placed the bottle on the bar, and Francisco immediately drank from the bottle, gulp after gulp. Even people who had high alcohol tolerance wouldn't be able to handle drinking that much whiskey. Seeing that he was drinking too much, Barbara said, "Mr. Boucher, you should slow down with that. If you get picked up by some chick, it would be hard for me to explain to Maisie. This is her place." Francisco was already drunk, but he was surprised. "Whose place?" She was hesitant. "Don't you know that Maisie is the owner of Glitz?" Francisco asked her, "Isn't my cousin the owner?" Barbara was rendered speechless. Francisco suddenly laughed. "You didn't know?" Barbara didn't say anything. She had been under the impression that Maisie had taken over the club. Why did it suddenly belong to Helios? After half an hour, Francisco slumped over the bar, staring at the drink in his hands. I told you, that child isn't mine. I never touched her, but no one believes me. I don't want to marry her. Miss Chase, is this gentleman your friend? The bartender asked. No, Barbara paused, then said, he's your boss cousin. The bartender was shocked, but didn't press on. The club has gone through 2 owners now. So he couldn't tell if that was true. Francisco's stomach suddenly lurched, so he sat up and looked at Barbara. Barbara noticed that something was wrong, but Francisco threw up on her shoulder before she could react. The bartender was shocked. Miss Chase. Barbara turned pale and turned her face away before gagging. Francisco was carried upstairs, blackout drunk. The new manager informed Sadie, and since Sadie knew Barbara, she took her upstairs to clean up. Helios got news of that and immediately went to Glitz. He never entered through the front gate because he didn't want anyone to find out. He walked out of the elevator on the 5th floor and saw Sadie. That kid is drunk? Even though Sadie didn't know Francisco, Barbara had told her that he was Helios' cousin, so she nodded. The new manager, Mr. Gelder, said, Mr. Boucher is terribly drunk and even threw up all over Miss Chase. Miss Chase? Helios raised his brows. He could guess that it was Barbara. Why would Barbara be drinking with this fellow? Barbara was taking a shower in another room. She hadn't minded her own business and was covered in vomit. She didn't plan to keep her clothes. She suddenly remembered something. Oh no. What am I going to wear? She planned to call Maisie so she could send some clothes over, but she realized that her phone was outside. Barbara wrapped herself up in a towel and carefully poked her head out to look around. No one was going to walk over, right? Probably not. Sadie wouldn't let anyone go in since she knew that she was there. She walked out of the shower and looked in her purse. But the door was opened at that moment. Helios, who walked in with a bag, stood there, stunned. Barbara was bent over as she was going through her bag, and since she had just gotten out of the shower, her body wasn't fully dried yet, and her hair stuck to the curves on her back. Chapter 853. Barbara wasn't a skinny woman but quite a voluptuous one, so the towel didn't cover up much. She noticed something, turned around, and stared straight into his eyes. Barbara was so shocked she grabbed onto the loose towel that was about to slip. Ah. Helios immediately turned around. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you, he gulped, but was glad he had his back toward her. It wasn't that he had never seen female actresses in shower scenes during his filming career, and he had to interact with actresses when they were in their bikinis. But he never had unclean thoughts about them. But this incident made him feel something. Barbara wrapped the towel around herself. Her face flushed, and she felt awkward. Do you need help, Mr. Boucher? He didn't turn around but instead handed the bag to her. I apologize on behalf of Francisco. We only have uniforms here. This is new. You can wear it for now. Barbara walked over and took the bag. She was happy that she had something to wear. She was surprised to see Helios' ears had turned red and smiled. Thank you. He nodded and immediately left the room without looking back. Barbara held the bag, and when she remembered how red his ears turned, she couldn't help but laugh. She thought that man wouldn't be shy but didn't expect him to be so shy. It made sense since he had a clean private life and had a blank page when it came to his love life. A man who didn't even have a scandal was like a piece of blank paper. Even the media didn't have the heart to contaminate him. She didn't have the right to do that either. Barbara put on the uniform. It didn't fit her because it was one size too small and was tight around her chest. She had to release the buttons to avoid breaking them. When she walked out of the room, she was surprised to see Helios standing in the corridor. Helios turned to look at her, but immediately looked away before clearing his throat. Let me send you back. It's late and dangerous. Barbara nodded. Thank you. Helios left through the back door with Barbara, opened the car door for her, and only walked to the driver's side after she was seated. The white car slowly drove away from Glitz. They were both silent on the way back. The neon lights shone into the dark cabin. Barbara turned to look at him and wanted to start a conversation. Why did you take over Glitz? Helios kept his eyes on the road. Nolan was worried that Maisie couldn't handle it, so I took over. Barbara smiled. I didn't know that you were so close to Mr. Goldman. He said, you're quite close to Maisie too. Barbara paused, then looked down and smiled. I thought that Maisie's past was very similar to mine at first, but then I realized that she's a lot stronger. You are pretty different. You look strong but are actually fragile, and Maisie looks weak but is actually strong. She is a lot more decisive when it comes to dealing with issues too. Helios looked at her and smiled. You let Katrina and the Salvadors off even after how they treated you and left it in the past. Maisie would give the people who hurt her a chance, but would not be gentle toward them. Barbara pressed her lips together. After exposing Katrina and Eugene, she let Katrina go because she was soft-hearted. She didn't want anything to happen to Katrina, even when she was in the hands of Ian's men. Chapter 854. When the case was retried, she just wanted the Salvadors to be convinced of her innocence and didn't care if they were going to retaliate. Helios sent her home. She got out and walked into her apartment building without looking back. After getting into her apartment building and walking into the elevator, she turned around. The car was still there. She felt warm, thinking that he wanted to see her safely home. When the elevator got to her floor, she walked out and saw a woman standing in the hallway. It was Katrina. So Barbara was stunned. Why are you here? Katrina was leaning against the wall with heavy makeup and holding a lit cigarette. Why can't I come and see you? Barbara was quiet. Katrina blew smoke out and looked at her. I'm your half-sister. I just have worse luck, because my father will never admit that I'm his. You forced me into this situation. Can't you share my problems? Barbara frowned. I forced you? She smiled. Why didn't you think about this when you worked with Eric Salvador? Katrina took a drag. Looking tired. I just wanted to ruin your reputation at that time. You finally admit to it now. Barbara walked to her door, keyed in her code, and heard Katrina speaking behind her. It was because of Ian. Her hand froze. Katrina's cigarette was half burnt, so she flicked the ash off. You never expected me to be in love with Ian, did you? Barbara was stunned and slowly turned to face Katrina, who was behind her. What are you saying? Ian was an undercover agent. He got close to us because he wanted to learn more about Tony Grant's business through Eric, but I never expected us to fall for the same man. How did you know that she loved Ian? She had never told anyone about that. Katrina scoffed. You forgot that I left school early and started playing around. I could tell from how you looked at him. Katrina threw the cigarette butt and stomped on it. I thought Ian brought me around because he loved me. But he was just using me to cover his identity as an undercover agent. She stopped in front of Barbara and looked at her without expression. He didn't use you because you were too pure. You were a student and Miss Chase, while I was the unknown bastard. Barbara was so shocked she couldn't say anything. Katrina grabbed her collar and was emotional. I even seduced the men that Ian was investigating for him and fed him information. I fell into this because of him. I didn't know he was using me, but had the purest of love for you instead. Barbara pushed her away and was angry too. Was that my fault? You worked with Eric to destroy me because of that? Katrina yelled, yes, it's all your fault. Katrina's eyes were red when she stared at her. He loved how innocent you were, so you would be just like me if I ruined that. So what if you were the legitimate Miss Chase? You'd be just as dirty, and he wouldn't look at you the same anymore. She burst out laughing after saying that. But I didn't expect him to disappear after that. I guess he couldn't handle that because he didn't manage to save you. We both lost him, so it felt that justice was served. Chapter 855. I hated you, and I hated the Chases. I wanted to take revenge, with Eugene or Peter's help, but why? Katrina grabbed onto Barbara's arm and completely lost her mind. Why was Ian so cruel to me? I slept with him, did you know? But he just uses me as a pawn. He opened up Glitz and still treated me cruelly because of you. He let his men assault me, but why weren't you the one who was assaulted? Barbara's arm hurt because of her grip. Suddenly, someone appeared and pushed Katrina away. She lost her footing and fell to the floor. Barbara looked at Helios, who suddenly appeared next to her. You're still here. Helios honestly answered, I saw her from downstairs, so I came over to check. He was about to leave when he looked up and saw someone by the window, so he stayed. He didn't know why. Katrina stood up and started laughing. Yelena, you're quite good at this. You've managed to seduce Mr. Boucher. Shut your mouth. Barbara stared at her fiercely, not everyone thinks like you. You chose your own path. You said Ian used you, but didn't you do that willingly, because you loved him? Katrina fell silent. Barbara didn't give her a chance to speak. Did he force you or coerce you? If he did, go talk to him. Why are you blaming me for all your misfortunes? Do you think I'm here for you to bully? Why do you think you deserve to blame anyone? Did I force you to make your choices, or did I force Ian not to love you? Your mom knew that my dad was married but still stuck to him and gave birth to you without letting him know. That wasn't your fault, it was my father's, but you can't blame anyone else for it, especially not me. Barbara was convincing and commanding. Katrina had nothing to say and finally left without looking back. Helios looked at Barbara, who looked down. Even if she didn't say anything, he could see the disappointment in her expression. After a long time, she finally said, I want a drink. Helios went to get some better alcohol from the convenience store with her and sat down on the lawn. She cracked open a can and handed it to him, then thought of something. Oh, no way. You're driving. You can't drink. Helios watched her drink, then looked up at the sky full of stars. He didn't seem to have seen a night sky like this before. Barbara became really talkative once she started drinking, sometimes complaining, and she even started talking about her past. When she got to the sad parts, she would start sobbing while hugging her legs. I really don't know how it turned into this. Helios held out his hand but paused midair, then patted her shoulder. It's all in the past now. You've had too much to drink. Let me walk you up. That's not too much. Barbara looked up. A few strands of hair stuck to the corner of her eyes that were wet, but her eyes that weren't focused betrayed her. She put her face on her knees and cried while laughing. Do I look like a villain? Helios looked away. His thoughts messy. No, not at all. She smiled. Did you know why I wanted to get to know you 2 years ago? Chapter 856. Helios was stunned as he looked at her in confusion. Barbara said drunkenly, because I knew Katrina was with your uncle. I wanted to get revenge on her, so I exposed the scandal between her and your uncle. Also, I was the one who leaked the news to your mother about the gem hunting event. I see, Helios replied half-heartedly. If Barbara had not exposed the scandal, not only him, the entire Boucher family wouldn't have learned that Yugyun had been keeping a woman outside behind everyone else's back. Barbara asked again, I'm the one who caused your uncle and aunt to get a divorce. Do you not resent me? Helios chuckled helplessly. You're drunk. Helios, Barbara suddenly went closer to Helios. Her blurry gaze seemed to have cleared up a bit. Helios looked at her without moving away. He did not like being near drunk people, but the smell of alcohol on her was not very offensive to him. After a short while, she smiled and said, "You know what? You're pretty good." Helios frowned. He seemed unable to understand what she meant by pretty good. Is she talking about the time I saved her? The moon can only be watched from afar and can't be defiled. It's quite nice, don't you think? What? Helios was stunned. It seemed to him that she was really drunk. Suddenly, Barbara burped, and he narrowed his eyes. Before he could say anything, she cupped her hands on his cheeks and asked, with a smile tugging at her lips, "Can I kiss you?" Helios froze. Other than surprise, there was also a feeling that he did not know how to describe, as he had never experienced before. Perhaps this was the first time a woman asked him if she could kiss him or not. He fixed his gaze on her lips, which were getting closer and closer. He could have pushed her away, but he did not know why he could not lift his arms up. They seemed to be held in place by an invisible force. Then, she fell, and her lips grazed past his chin. He subconsciously grabbed her body, and she fell asleep on him. Looking at the person in his arms, Helios pushed her. "Barbara?" She said something, but he couldn't hear it well. Then, her head tilted, and she did not say anything anymore. Helios put his hand on his forehead and sighed. She was clearly drunk, yet she refused to admit it. The question, "Can I kiss you?" she had asked was still echoing in his head. Is this what she looks like when she's drunk? A ray of sunlight filtered into the room. The automated curtains were drawn and allowed more sunlight to fill the room. Maisie frowned and lifted her arm to cover her eyes as she slowly opened her eyes. Nolan noticed that she was waking up. He grabbed her into his arms and kissed the center of her eyebrows. "Are you awake?" "Yeah," she replied softly. She found a comfortable spot on his chest and fell asleep again. A mischievous smile appeared on the corner of Nolan's lips as he slipped his hands into the sheet. After a short while, Maisie cracked her eyes open and began kicking and punching him. "You asshole!" "Ouch!" she suddenly yelled out in pain. Nolan hastily got up and flipped the sheet open. "What's wrong?" Maisie's cheeks were red from her anger. She put her hand on the back of her waist and said through gritted teeth, "Sprained my back." "This is all your fault." Before she finished speaking, she buried her head into the pillow. Seeing how embarrassed she was, Nolan chuckled and put his hand on her waist. "Yeah, it's all my fault. Let me help you massage." As he massaged her waist, his eyes slowly changed. Just like a lion that hadn't gotten to eat enough, he pounced at Maisie again, resuming what he had left off last night. It was 7:30 in the morning as Nolan carried Maisie downstairs. He put her on the couch and said, "Stay here. I'll go make breakfast." He kissed the top of her head and went to the kitchen. Leaning against the couch, Maisie looked mesmerizingly at his busy figure in the kitchen with a smile on her face. Chapter 857. Maisie did not know when it happened, but Nolan was all she had in her eyes by the time she realized it. After Nolan finished preparing the breakfast, Maisie rested her chin on her palm and looked at her husband longingly. "Honey, seeing how much I cooperated with you last night and this morning, shouldn't you say yes already?" Nolan put the sunny side up on her plate and replied, "I'll consider." Maisie put her hands down and sat up straight. "What? Why do you still need to consider it?" He lifted his eyebrows and put a cup of warm milk on the table. "It depends on your performance for the next few days. If I'm happy, maybe I'll say yes." In order to make it work, Maisie had no other choice but to gnash her teeth and nod. Seeing Maisie's sullen appearance, Nolan asked, "Are you not jealous to have your husband shoot an endorsement like that with another man?" "Jealous? Why should I? Both of you are." "Well, this is different. You guys are like brothers. And I don't see any problem for you to promote the brotherly love between you and Helios. They're not in love with each other or whatsoever. It's just two handsome men standing together to take a few pictures. Nolan narrowed his eyes as he felt a little upset when he found out that his wife was into the nonsense between him and Helios. He just couldn't understand it at all. Maisie reached out to his hand and said whiningly, "Just one time, I promise." Nolan just couldn't stand it whenever she was asking for something from him this way. He couldn't bring himself to say no to her and did not want her to be sad. In the end, he put the cup down and said, "All right, just this once." Meanwhile, Barbara slept until morning. When she woke up, she reeked of alcohol, felt lightheaded, and was thirsty. After glancing around her surroundings, she jerked up from her bed. I'm in a hotel?" Then, the things that had happened last night slowly returned to her mind. After Helios sent her back last night, she bumped into Katrina. Then, Helios showed up again, and they drank alcohol together. Besides, "Can I kiss you?" When the question Barbara had asked Helios surfaced in her head, she covered her cheeks in embarrassment. Barbara hastily flipped the sheet open and got out of the bed. Then, she happened to see a note underneath a glass of water on the desk beside the bed. She took the note up and read it. "I don't know the door's password to your house, so I could only send you to a hotel. I know you will be thirsty when you wake up, so the glass of water is for you." Looking at the beautiful handwriting and the sweet message, she knew instantly that Helios had left the note. Barbara lowered her head and thought, does he treat everyone with such care as well? However, this was not what she should be worrying about. What she should be worrying about was the question she had asked Helios last night. How was she going to face him next time? In the afternoon, at Seoul. What? Mr. Goldman has said yes? Kennedy looked at Maisie in disbelief. Maisie nodded. Of course. There's no way he would reject me. Besides, Nina had also said that Helios was fine with it as long as Nolan said okay. Although it seemed like he was doing Nolan a big favor, Maisie did not care about it as long as he said yes. Maisie asked Kennedy to contact the people from the fashion magazine. Once they heard that Helios and Nolan were going to work on a commercial together, they immediately sent someone over. The people in Seoul were all very excited when they heard that Helios and Nolan were going to work on a commercial together. Both Helios and Nolan arrived at Seoul at the same time. Helios fans were all gathered outside Seoul, and it took a lot of security to maintain order at the scene. Helios got out of the car. He was wearing a long blue-gray trench coat with a white turtleneck shirt. It made him look gentler and more elegant. He turned his head around to look at Nolan. Nolan was wearing a black suit, and he looked sharp and cool. Chapter 858. Both of them had created quite a commotion on the internet with the Helios Nolan when they were at Winston Island. Now that they had appeared in front of the public together, all of their fans were beyond excited. Sticking his hand in the pocket, Helios said, "I thought you were going to say no." Nolan glanced at him and replied, "Honestly, I really wanted to." After that, he went into the lobby first. Helios chuckled and followed after him. There were so many fans gathered outside of Seoul, causing the employees of the opposite and adjacent stores to come out and join in the fun. I heard that Seoul Jewelry invited a movie star to shoot an endorsement. Isn't that awesome? Not only a movie star. Have you forgotten about Mr. Goldman? After all, the owner of Seoul Jewelry is Mr. Goldman's wife. I'm so jealous of them. It's no wonder that their business is so good. Kennedy and the shooting crew were waiting for them in the lobby. When Maisie saw both of them appear at the same time, her eyes widened. What a coincidence. It seems like they can read each other's minds. Nolan looked at Maisie and squinted his eyes dangerously. He knew what was going on in Maisie's head with just a single look, and he swore to God that he was going to settle the account with her again after the shooting was over. Maisie could sense Nolan's intentions when he was looking at her. Her cheeks burned, and she thought to herself that she would be dead again tonight. Both Nolan and Helios were very handsome. They did not even need to wear any makeup, and they just needed to put on the same outfit. They then wore the same ring on their index and tail finger. They did not need to say any lines. They just needed to put up some poses. Maisie came out of the shooting studio, where both Nina and Quincy were waiting outside. When Quincy saw her, he walked up to her and asked, "Mrs. Goldman, why did you ask Mr. Goldman to come here for the endorsement shooting?" Quincy did not know that Nolan was here to shoot the endorsement with Helios. He would have laughed himself to death if he had known about it. Maisie blinked and replied, "I'm doing this for the company. With both of them in the endorsement, I'm sure we'll be able to earn a pot full of money from it." Quincy smiled. "Mrs. Goldman, you're behaving more and more like a businesswoman." After all, she was willing to ask her husband to become a model for her product in order to make money. Maisie did not deny it. She laughed and replied, "Really? I think the same as well." Nina went closer to her and whispered, "Honestly, when Hells and Mr. Goldman are standing together, they look like they could make a great couple." Nolan had never appeared in the same photo with Helios in the past. Even if they had some interactions on Facebook, when those tourists had published the photos they took at Winston Island, they instantly went viral, to the point that some of the netizens even said they were the perfect match for coupling. Therefore, Maisie was confident that this magazine endorsement would definitely become a hit. Maisie covered her mouth and chuckled. "Right? We're going to make a lot of money this time." "You're right. Hold on a second. I have to publish some of the photos on Facebook too." Nina took her phone out and captured a few photos of them. Helios and Nolan took a few photos in front of the photography reflector. The photographer was amazed by the photos, and he was certain that this was probably the most expensive magazine cover he had ever done. When Maisie was looking at Nina's phone, she felt a shadow looming over her. Both of them lifted their heads. Nolan grabbed her shoulders and took her away, leaving Nina and Quincy to look at each other in confusion. Helios came over and fastened the button with one hand. He looked in the direction where Nolan was taking Maisie and asked, "Are you guys satisfied now?" Nina let out an embarrassed smile while Quincy was dumbfounded. Nolan. Please walk slower. Honey. Maisie could hardly keep up with Nolan's speed, and she was panting heavily. Chapter 859. They came all the way to an empty corridor. Nolan pinned her on the way, leaned closer to her, and planted a deep kiss on her lips. "It seems to me that you're having a lot of fun, huh? Z. Do you still want to do something like this again in the future?" Maisie's chest was heaving up and down vigorously. Her eyes were misted over as she pouted and said, "Nope. I'm not going to do something like this anymore. He's so bad. He just knows how to take advantage of the opportunity to bully me. But I love it." Nolan stroked her eyes with his finger and chuckled. "Now that you're satisfied, it should be my turn, right?" Although she knew what Nolan was implying, she still couldn't help but feel embarrassed. "Not now." He leaned closer and whispered into her ear, "How about tonight?" Maisie wrapped her arms around his neck, looked at him straight, and offered him a wide smile. "Since you're being so cooperative today, let me do it tonight." Nolan chuckled hoarsely and kissed her eyebrows. "I'll be looking forward to it then." #Helios Nolan's endorsement #hashtag Mr. Goldman, Helios These two pieces of news went viral on the internet in just 2 days, and they became one of the hottest topics on Google Trends. Even the photos of them arriving at Seoul that someone had taken in the dark became a hit on Facebook, and they also appeared on the headlines of entertainment outlets. A lot of the netizens were stunned. Some of them even teased Nolan for cheating on his wife since he went to his wife's jewelry company to shoot an endorsement with Helios. Soon, a certain passionate netizen found out that it was Maisie who had invited both of them to shoot the endorsement. When the news got out, the netizens exploded. Hashtag Mr. Goldman's wife is really into the Helios Nolan thing, despite him being her husband. She's so proud of them that she even invited both of them to be the spokespeople of her product. Hashtag Mr. Goldman. Your wife is so funny. Hashtag Mr. Goldman truly loves his wife very much. If I asked my husband to do this, he would certainly say I must have gone out of my mind. Maisie also appeared on Google Trends because she was very into the coupling between Nolan and Helios. Some of the netizens also went to her Facebook and teased her for betraying her husband. In a Western restaurant. Z, you're so incredible. How could you get so much into the Helios Nolan thing? You even tried to earn money out of it. Riley had an off day today. So she had come out to have lunch and gossip with Maisie. Maisie cut her steak slowly and replied, why not? It's such a good opportunity to make some money, so there's no way I should let go of it, right? Riley clicked her tongue. Sure enough. You're getting more and more business-minded after becoming a boss. Which business person doesn't want to earn money? I have to raise my children, okay? Maisie chuckled. Biting her fork, Riley said sulkily, even if you don't earn money to raise your children. The money that Mr. Goldman earns is more than enough for you guys to spend. He's now the second richest person in the world. His total worth is more than 10 million, not to mention that Black Gold earns a few millions each year. He's just like a walking ATM. The wealthiest person in the world was Yorick, the descendant of the Hathaways in Yarramore, and now Nolan was just a rank below him. Maisie chuckled and replied, that's his money, not mine. You two are unreasonable. Riley sighed. It was only now that Riley saw the reason all the socialites wanted to get married to Nolan. He was good at making money and loved his wife a lot, not to mention that he was handsome. She was certain that Maisie must have saved the entire galaxy in her previous life. If it hadn't been for the small accident 9 years ago, Maisie would not have come across Nolan. If she had not come across Nolan, things would have happened differently. Everything was destined. If it isn't Mrs. Goldman and Miss Hill? A voice erupted from their back. Riley and Maisie turned their heads simultaneously, and the person walking up to them was none other than Maisie. Chapter 860. Both of them had heard that Maisie had gotten pregnant, and Elder Master Boucher wanted Francisco to marry her. Maisie had begun going around bragging that she was going to become a member of the Bouchers. Not only had she moved back to live with the Hannigans, but the people who looked down on her last time began to gather around her, currying her favor. Riley clicked her tongue and said, just when I thought who it was. So it's you. The woman who took advantage of her baby to get into a prestigious family. Maisie did not react violently toward Riley's sarcastic remark like she used to do. Ever since she had been kicked out of the Hannigans, she had changed. She had become calmer and more collected. She caressed her still flat stomach and smiled, yeah, you're right. Even if I took advantage of my baby, you can't deny the fact that he's the descendant of the Bouchers. Elder Master Boucher loves him very much. We're going to become a family in the near future. Don't you think you should address me as your cousin-in-law, Ms. Hill? Riley rolled her eyes at Maisie and replied, It's still unknown whether the baby in your stomach is Francisco's kid. Maisie's face sank. What do you mean by that? Even if you don't like me, I won't allow you to insult a descendant of the Bouchers like that. Besides, your aunt is one of the Bouchers. Don't you think you shouldn't disgrace her in front of the public? Just when Riley was about to say something, Maisie stopped her. She looked at Maisie and said nonchalantly, well, congratulations then, Ms. Hannigans. Riley has a big mouth. I hope you can forgive her. Maisie looked at her back and sneered. You should be glad that I could come out safely, right, Mrs. Goldman? Or else. My kid wouldn't have been able to go back to his own family. She was saying that Maisie had sent her to the police station through a recording pen. Maisie replied indifferently, it's a good thing you've learned your lesson and decided to turn a new leaf. I hope you can stay this way. Maisie's face turned grim, and she said through gritted teeth, I'll never forget about this lesson. After that, she turned around and left. Riley flew into a rage as she watched Maisie walk away. This woman is behaving like an ass, before she even becomes one of the Bouchers. I can't imagine what she will turn into after she really becomes Francisco's wife. Maisie took a sip from the glass of water and did not say anything. She was not interested in knowing who was the father of the baby in Maisie's stomach. She did not care who she was going to marry either. As long as she did not do anything overboard, she would not do anything to her. After the jewelry endorsement of Nolan and Helios became the magazine's cover, the magazine was sold out within half a day. At the same time, Sol successfully surpassed La Perla in terms of attention and sales volume, approaching Taylor Jewelry and becoming the third largest jewelry company. The impact brought about by Helios and Nolan was big. Many famous celebrities in the entertainment industry began approaching Sol in an attempt to strike a deal with them. Some of the biggest fashion events had started renting jewelry from Sol to first-tier actresses for events, large dinners, and so on. Throughout the entire week, other than working and signing contracts, Maisie also worked on preparing a birthday surprise for Nolan. She did not say anything about it to Nolan, and she only discussed it with Riley, Barbara, and Louis. At Black Gold, Nolan couldn't even focus on the document. After all, Maisie had been ignoring him for nearly a week. He pinched at his nose and asked Quincy, "What has Maisie been doing recently?" Quincy was stunned for a moment before replying. "Mrs. Goldman has had a pretty tight schedule in the past week. I heard that she's going here and there, signing contracts with some of the major brands. The sales volume of Sol is getting better and better." Nolan frowned. He suddenly regretted letting Maisie operate a jewelry company. When she became busy, she completely forgot about him. Looking at the gloomy expression on Nolan's face, Quincy had a strange feeling that Nolan was like an abandoned large dog waiting for his female owner.